Dr. Irina Zelenkova is our next presenter. Until very recently, she was the head physician at the Russian Olympic Committee Innovation Center. She is now moving forward with sports science research at the University of Zaragoza in Spain, and she's working independently with several international Olympic athletes. She's a longtime user of the near-infrared spectroscopy technology, and her presentation is on the application of muscle oxygen monitoring to the individualization of altitude training. Excellent topic. Please take it away, Dr. Zelenkova.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And first of all, good afternoon for everyone. And Roger, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really happy to share my experience in the using near-infrared spectroscopy in the practice. In the very beginning, I would love to point out that I really have a very long love with the near-infrared spectroscopy. So when I was doing my PhD thesis, I was working with the Hamamatsu near-infrared spectroscopy for the determination of the oxygen saturation in oxygenation in brain and muscle oxygenation. And it was very interesting experience. And from that period of time, so I was using really different types of near-infrared spectroscopy devices like Inspectra, Portamon, and now I'm really happy that we have MOXIE in our hands that really made completely easier to go from lab to the field and to use this very valuable technology into the practice. And later I will show how actually it's really easy to do it. So through my presentation, I would love to cover these topics. I will start with the factors that limits VO2 max, and then how near-infrared spectroscopy is used for the evaluation of the muscle oxygenation. Then we'll go through the training modifications at the altitude, and then we'll cover the individualization of the interval training, and then we'll show some practical examples of how we can use MOXIE in our practice at the altitude with athletes. So from the very beginning, I would love to start with the factors limiting aerobic performance. It was really a long period of time when people didn't knew about that there are different factors that can limit aerobic performance, and now it's very important to understand that aerobic performance can be limited by different factors, and if athletes has a limitation on one of these factors, so his performance will decrease. And actually knowing now for a moment we have a lot of different tests and methods to measure these different layers, the different parameters that limit aerobic performance. And so measuring these parameters in athlete, we can actually understand which of them is limiting his aerobic performance, and then we can help him to focus more in his training on this factor and then improve his aerobic performance. So of course there are several, if we go from the very beginning, so oxygen delivery, very important factor that limits aerobic performance, cardiac output, O2 extraction, and of course the mitochondrial function that also can limit aerobic performance, and of course the O2 extraction is influenced by mitochondria. Of course, the method of the near-infrared spectroscopy is really helpful to understand the level of the delivery of the oxygen to the working muscles and how actually muscles are extracting oxygen from the bloodstream. For example, if there is a lot of oxygen coming through the bloodstream, but the muscle is not able to deliver all this oxygen, so there is a problem of the oxygen extraction. So here we can see the limitation, for example, for this athlete. And the method of near-infrared spectroscopy is quite difficult. And here I just put it very basic schematic representation of the near-infrared spectroscopy monitor. And the basic parameters that are measured are oxygenated hemoglobin, deoxygenated hemoglobin, and the ratio of oxygenated and total hemoglobin is expressed as the muscle oxygenation. This parameter that we will focus more in this presentation, and this parameter is very important for us to understand what is exactly happening in the muscles. And then coming back to our topic and coming back to the altitude training. So these factors that I listed are about the factors that are limiting aerobic performance. So of course, they are very important at the sea level, but also the same things are working at the altitude. And when we go to the altitude, several factors are changing. And the main of them is that the altitude leads to the decrease of partial pressure of inspired oxygen. And it means that on all levels of the oxygen delivery, we have decrease on the inspired partial pressure of oxygen. We see decrease in the arterial oxygen saturation, and then we see decrease in performance. Here, of course, I focused more on the moderate altitude, about 1,000 meters, 1,500 meters to 2,500 meters, is the most traditional altitude zones for the training of elite athletes. But of course, same processes are happening at different altitudes. So coming to the altitude training, we know very well who athletes who been at altitude, coaches who also been at the altitude, that in the first 2 weeks of the acclimatization, the training load and training intensity should be modified, because there is a lot of risk of overtraining, especially in the first days. So training load comparing to the sea level should be really modified. And there are some general rules that provide us experience, that we can see, and some recommendation that we can use for the optimization of the training at the altitude. And these recommendations are related to the training volume, that the training volume at the altitude should be reduced approximately 10 to 20% initially at the altitude, that the interval workload training intensity should be reduced approximately 5 to 7% initially, and then that the recovery during the interval workout should be doubled initially. And this, you can see that this recommendation are not individual. So the variation between 10 and 20%, 10% is really a huge recommendation, especially for elite athletes. Even the recommendation from 5 to 7, it's not individual. So, and here arises the question how we can individualize the approach in terms of the approach to the altitude training, to the intensity and interval workouts at the altitude. And here you see very traditional methods of the optimization of the training intensity, and optimization of the and individualization of the interval training at the sea level. Lactate measurement is really used by everybody for the determination of the intensity and intensity of the interval and recovery period, especially recovery period. And of course, heart rate monitoring is very traditional tool for the determination of the individual response to the training load and when to start the next interval in terms of the recovery. When heart rate drops below 130, you can start the next you can start next interval. But here there is a huge problem for the altitude. As you know, when you go to the altitude, heart rate actually, especially in first 2 weeks when there is a acclimatization period, heart rate is not really meaningful for us. It doesn't provide us a real information about what is happening in the body. So then lactate measurement is also not really precise and is not giving us a lot of information related to what happening exactly in the muscle. And here we come to the muscle oxygenation monitor, and MOX is really perfect because it's can be connected to the watches, and we can see in real life the data from the monitor, and it helps us to determine and to see especially what is happening inside the muscle. And here in this graph, you can see the response to the altitude of 1,950 meters and 900 meters above the sea level at different speed from 16 kilometers per hour till 21. And you can see actually how tremendously is decreasing the muscle oxygen saturation and the heart rate. We see that actually comparing heart rate at the altitude and heart rate at the sea level, we doesn't see a lot of difference between these two parameters. And here is also we can very easily understand that muscle oxygen saturation will provide us more valuable information for individualization of the interval training at the altitude. Not only interval, but actually all types of training at the altitude. So, and here we come to the practical application of the oxygen monitoring at the altitude, and it was very useful tool for the individualization of the intensity of the amount of the repetition during the training and the rest period during the interval training. And here I will go already to some practical examples that I would like to show you. And now we can learn a bit how to interpret the data from the muscle oxygenation in terms of the practice already at the altitude in the real training. So you can see here it's a training load in the rollers, and this is aerobic workload, and it's quite, I can say, easy it's very light aerobic training, 4 minutes load and 4 minutes rest, and it was done at the altitude 1,800 meters above the sea level, and you can see how very good these intervals are. So during the load, muscle oxygenation is going down, and during the recovery period is coming back to the to normal values, and then coming back. There is no any pronounced decrease of the muscle oxygenation. And here you can see another example. It's from the track and field athlete. She was doing 5 times 800 meters at the altitude of 1,700 meters. And here you can see how during each repetition, during interval, the muscle oxygenation is going down, and in the interval 4, you can see already that the muscle oxygenation is dropped really down, and at the 5th interval, already at the same intensity, the oxygenation is were going more pronouncedly down. So, and this interval training especially was stopped at the 5th interval because the muscle oxygenation at the same speed dropped too deep. So muscles weren't already able to sustain this load, and it was the metabolic stress to the muscle were too high. And here also would like to show you a very interesting picture. It's a completely different type of training. It's very hard glycolytic training that was done by professional speed skaters. They were doing 4 times in 1 minute 15 seconds at the altitude 1,500 meters. So you can see how pronouncedly drop down the muscle oxygenation, and then going back, going up to the normal values, and then going down. So this is quite stressful training for the metabolic system, but it's also very interesting to see different types of training in terms of the muscle oxygenation, and then compare different types of training between each other. And especially it's very interesting to compare same training done at the altitude and at the sea level, in terms of the adaptation and in terms of the time course of the muscle oxygenation changes at the altitude during first, especially 14 weeks before athlete can do very hard trainings. It's finishing my presentation. I would like to put some key messages that I would love to you to take away. And I hope you understood how the muscle oxygenation is a very powerful tool for the individualization of the training at the not only at the sea level, especially at the altitude, and it allows us to see what is happening inside the muscle. So you can see how oxygenation is going down and how is recovery, how it recovers. Also, you can see. Also, you can work with the amount of the intervals that can be done with the athlete, and intervals repetition is also very important question for the coaches. How much training, how many repetitions should be done by athlete? And here is the response when at the standard speed you see decrease in muscle oxygenation. It's time to stop because muscles already are not able to sustain this metabolic stress. Of course, there are several limitations of this technology, and the fat interlayer is one of them. And of course, it's very easy to measure near muscle oxygenation in elite athlete because the skin fat layer is very thin, especially in male athlete. In female athletes, it's a bit bigger, but in amateur athlete, it's with excessive skin fat. It actually can influence into accuracy of the method, and you can measure actually fat and not muscles. So you should be very sure about the about the fat interlayer, to not doubt and not mistake in terms what you see, what oxygenation of which tissue you see. And last but not least, I would love to point out that you should train smarter, not harder, and basing on the individual muscle oxygenation data, your athletes can avoid excessive metabolic stress, and this is very important especially in the altitude, and this is very important in terms of the recovery of athletes. And I will point out it again, that especially at the altitude. So thank you so much for your attention. And if you would like to chat with me, I put here some of my social media. So please join.